Welcome to But Jesus Drank Wine.
And other stories that kept us stuck. I'm Meade.
And I'm Christy.
In this podcast, we'll explore the stories that kept us, stuck, wanting to drink and not wanting to drink all at the same time.
Join us as we show you that freedom from alcohol does not have to mean a life sentence of misery and missing out.
But actually means living an authentic life full of peace, joy, and purpose.
Hey, babe, how are you?
So good. I'm excited to talk about connection today.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's such a good one. And I feel like I hear it so often from clients, don't you? Like, I drink to connect. I drink because I want to connect. I drink because I want to connect with girlfriends. I drink because I want to connect with my husband. I drink because I want to connect with family. Do you hear that a lot too?
It's like alcohol is a bridge or something. And yet I think it's something that's the messaging we've received. And then, it's been maybe reinforced. But if you really, I'm so glad that I know what I know now, that it is not true connection. And I can think back to like when I was starting to explore my relationship to alcohol, and is wine serving me? Is it getting in the way? It was the fear of disconnection is what kept me drinking longer and not doing anything about the conflict I felt. And then also the wanting deeper connection is also at the same time. It's like the knowing it's not and also thinking it is all at the same time. That was so hard for me to reconcile. So yeah, like I think it's a big one for folks. What did it look like for you?
Yeah. I think for me personally, one of my biggest fears was losing friends. So again, it tied into a lot of, and we've talked about a little bit like what other people think. But I think as we're humans, like we know we are literally hardwired for connection. And so part I think of like not being afraid to lose friends was exactly that. It was afraid to lose that connection. It was very much a part of my dating with Chris. We were like really into wine. And so I was like, is this going to kill my marriage? Because it's going to kill the connection in my marriage. And so I had a lot of fear around it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's that fear posture that keeps us from being able to kind of like sometimes take those like first steps. And, we talk so much about using curiosity and compassion as kind of like, you find yourself in that place of like, I want to explore my relationship to alcohol, but I have all of these fears, whether it be from fear of disconnection from folks, fear of whatever it is. Using compassion for where you are allows us to use curiosity to just ask the questions. Okay, like what is connection? What is connection? What does it look like? And how does wine contribute to connection? How does it take away from it? And when you start asking questions versus, when we're in that place of like fear around, I'm just so certain that it's going to lead to disconnection. Well, but first we've got to zoom out and get curious about what does connection even look like? Because like I said, I was stuck in fearing disconnection and also kind of knowing deep down that it was getting in the way of connection. So how do you reconcile those first steps out of that?
Yeah. And I think that's so interesting because that's exactly what I always end up asking is, well, what is connection to you? And I think when we're doing this work, we realize that what we think is exactly what you just said. What we think is connecting with somebody maybe isn't, right? So how can you truly connect with somebody else if part of your brain is shut off and you end up not remembering half of a conversation? How is that connecting with somebody else, right? How is showing up as basically a different version of yourself, especially when you're not kind of feeling like you're really living your true values? Like if you're not showing up as yourself, how can you connect with somebody else? Right? Yeah. Like, I did not get that until a ways into my journey. And when I realized that, it's like, well, how can anybody be friends with the Christy that is like this, like walking, talking, like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like facade of a person that I don't even want to be. Does that make sense?
Totally. Me too. That was absolutely. And yet when you're in that, it's so hard to see that that's what you're living into. And I think, you're right. Like the connection, true connection, at least through the exploration I did around it, comes from, really knowing somebody and being known by somebody. And in order to really know somebody, it requires risk on our part, because we have to be curious about them. We have to ask them questions. We have to, we have to have conversations. I think about like social anxiety and how much, for a topic for another day, but how alcohol helps. So I thought at some point that, helps with social anxiety. So alcohol would be the thing that would help me be able to ask questions of somebody else and get to know them. So not true, but that is for sure something that I had running subconsciously. And then also, on the flip side of that, well, alcohol helps, someone get to know me, because then I'm, the risk of being vulnerable, I can be more vulnerable if I've been drinking. But that, I learned it could not be further from the truth. To your point of what you said is like, when we're in that space, we're kind of projecting we're protecting ourselves by not sharing our real selves, and kind of protecting an image or what people can be exposed to or see of us. And I think that's where it gets kind of tricky too, right?
Yeah. And I don't know if this happened like when in your drinking days, but I feel like I definitely felt like I was really connecting on a really deep level with certain people, because what we would do is we would go out and we would have a bottle of wine, and we would, sometimes end up in tears, sometimes, but we really would like, we would share like deep stuff. But I think it was in a way that, first of all, wasn't constructive, right? Because it was almost like, I don't know. I don't even know really like how to explain it, but like, you'd go out, you'd have a bottle of wine with your girlfriends. You'd end up talking about like your kids or your marriage or what was going on in your life. And you thought, this is such a good friend of mine. I can share all these deep, dark things. But first of all, in the cold light of day, would you really have shared what you shared and in the way that you did? And are you really even getting any constructive anything back, right? Because it's like it would almost end up in just like a giant whinge fest, like a complaining fest, and then you'd leave more depressed because you just dumped a bunch of depressant, right? Alcohol is a depressant, on your depressing stuff. And so on one hand you'd think, oh gosh, that was so great to get out there and like just get out with my girlfriends and really lay it all out there. But you'd never feel better. I guess this is my long-winded way of saying, right? Like you never would leave those dinners, especially the next morning, feeling like uplifted or encouraged in the right way. Does that make sense? Do you feel like that?
Totally. Well, I think what I can relate to in that is that it was this entry point for us all to be able to say those more, the harder things, right? That maybe we do a good job of like protecting from other people seeing, but to your point, in the way of like, we're all just now kind of complaining about these things with no empowerment or resolve or true, like I know that like,
or truth.
Yeah. And like, I know my girlfriend's heard, like when, but did they really hear? Like we were all there, but were we really all there? That's a different scenario than, getting together for, with a girlfriend, without alcohol and sharing what's really bothering you and allowing someone to hold that space for you and allowing someone to love you and support you and in what you're working through in a really honest and real way that leaves you feeling uplifted and maybe empowered moving forward versus, like, to your point, throwing gasoline on the fire, the depressant on top of the depressant that is just gonna leave you feeling worse off.
Yeah. And to your point about, like, did they really hear me? I mean, I think it was at the end of my drinking, like, career, it was very clear, I think, to me at one point where nobody actually was hearing me because we were having the same conversations over and over again. Or, you know, you had said something and then the text message came the next day asking something about something you had spoken about for a half an hour the night before. So how is any of that connection? How is any of that connection? You know?
Yeah. That's where we can stay so. It's like when we start looking at what our stories are that keep us stuck. We talk a lot about this, like, what are those stories? And one of them being that for the longest time, it was wine was the thing that was allowing me to feel connected to people. The way that I know now, like, when a story is probably not true is when I feel that challenging it is, I feel that kind of like rub or that tension when I challenge it. So when I think about, like, well, no, it is the thing that's connecting me. And then it's like, but I feel this tension around that. It's like, because I know that maybe I have shared something or someone else has shared something, but also, like, these are the same kind of, these are the same kind of nights out that we have on the regular, and nothing comes from it. Nothing changes, nothing moves forward in that way. So there's no, like, forward movement as part of it. And I think that is something that if I want to feel connected to somebody, it involves, like, continual forward movement, and it starts with vulnerability. And vulnerability is not the same as just being able to, like, say whatever you want to say when you want to say it, right? Like, there's a little bit more to it. Yeah, that's so good. So good. What do you feel like? Do you feel like you had the fear of it disrupting connection in your marriage? Oh, for sure. I mean, but again, like, because I didn't question it for so long, right? Like, it just was this underlying, like, thing, this belief that I had that it was connective. It wasn't until I was really, courageous in being able to say, okay, like, is this getting in the way? And that's where that kind of rub comes in. But, we met my husband and I met at a beach party, and it was, that's what we drank together. We went out for a drink together. It was kind of a continuation of college in a lot of ways, what we did, in our early relationship. And we didn't think that there was anything wrong with that, and not saying it was or wasn't, but, and we certainly were able to connect in other ways, and which is great. But when I can look back, I can see how you only look at the fact that, oh, well, alcohol is the common denominator, so that must mean that's the reason why we're connected. Thankfully, I learned that there was so much more than that. But it's easy to think that is the thing. And what if I change my relationship to alcohol? What if I don't drink? How is that going to change my marriage? Again, kind of talking about, like, that fear-based, oh my gosh, like, I need to keep drinking to have connection to my friends and my family and my husband and all of those things, which turned out to be so untrue.
Yeah.
What did that look like for you in your early dating life? Y'all connected over wine, right? Like, that was...
Yeah, definitely. So I was just like, what are we even going to do? Right? What are we even going to, like, talk about? How do we even communicate if it's not over a bottle of wine? And listen, I think this is a real fear. And I think because, I think we probably both, at least I do, know people that their relationship does drastically change when one of them stops drinking. So I get the fear. I had the fear, but I think that the level, coming back to connection, the level of connection and vulnerability and intimacy that you have when you're showing up as your true, unaltered, not numbed out, dumbed down version of yourself is a different level of connection that that's so much better than turning off part of your brain, your prefrontal cortex or what have you, and screwing with your memory making and all of this other stuff. So if you can, as like we always say, just, you know, if you try it, just try it, like you will see, right? You will see that it's a totally different level of connection, I think. And I feel like I'm really lucky and proud that like we are still growing together without me drinking. I mean, at the time of this recording, my husband's still drinking and he's cut down a lot. But we don't fight. So that helps a lot too, right? We don't fight. Like, I mean, of course everybody fights. I'm not saying I have a perfect marriage. Nobody does, but the dumb fighting, taking that off the table, taking the dumb nitpicky, I'm exhausted, so I'm just like biting your head off or snapping at the kids or whatever, taking all of that off the table, I think helps my marriage immensely. What about you?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. If you think about if I can think about how many times those stupid fights, the ones that were, like so unnecessary, how they either revolved around, you know, they started with alcohol or post drinking, what that looked like, and how I love what you just said too, because the amount of fighting is so much less, and that's when you can look at, like, if you're doing like a pros and cons list for, you know, how does alcohol affect connection, like that would be something that I would definitely put on my sheet, that the dumb fights that come from. So I'm like, okay, here's the evidence that says that actually that's not connecting. So while it might have been our hobby, like we used to joke around, like, you know, hobbies, couples have, you know, hobbies, things that they like to do together. Some people like to go hiking together. They like to, you know, play golf or whatever they do together. I used to say that our hobby was cocktailing, like cocktail as a verb of cocktailing. That's what we did. That was our shared interest. But again, kind of like zooming out and like being more objective and observing, getting curious about what does it all look like? What does connection look like? I can think about those stupid fights and how that, gosh, like just the absence of those fights, and how that is evidence that says, like, no, actually this wasn't something that connected us. It was just an illusion. So yeah, that definitely is a, gosh, I hadn't even remembered that until you said that. I'm like, I'm having like flashbacks to the stupid fights.
The stupid fights when you've just each had a few drinks and then it just ends up ruining the whole date anyways, and it ruins, you know, it's just like it takes so much, I don't know, negativity out and pressure off and everything when that's not happening in the background. I feel like we have to kind of touch on the messaging and how we got to this belief, because since I've stopped drinking, I feel like this is the one that I get really angry about when I see it as an advertisement, right? So I was with my kids a few months ago in the movie theater, and they had this advert, and I think it was for, I don't know what it was for. It was for gin or something, some sort of like hard alcohol. And it was a grandson, like an older grandson in his 20s, and the grandfather, and they were at a campfire and they were both drinking whatever it was out of the shared flask. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it is so gross, right? Like, you're selling connection with your grandfather. You're selling connection. You're just, when you see these things now, and then like the other day, it's Christmas time here in London, drove by a billboard. What was it? It was just like billboards everywhere of just like cheersing, like in front of the Christmas tree or whatever it is, like gather and like together. And it's like, it really is one of the ones that I think the alcohol industry and big alcohol like really lean into this one. And when you see it, you just like realize how we got here, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. And they are playing to that uh, biological need that we have as humans to connect with people. And they know that. That's why it sells. And, I think about the 11 million bits of data that we are like absorbing every second, and only 50 of those bits are conscious. So like there's a ton of data that we're absorbing from advertisements, from just signs, from, everywhere we go. And we're absorbing all of that. And that's what gets kind of locked into our subconscious and affects these stories that we tell ourselves that keep us doing the thing. So yeah, it's like, how did we get here? Well, I saw it from a really young age, and this is not a knock on my parents at all. It's just what everybody did. But growing up at the beach, and the time that we would spend down, at the beach in the summer on the weekends, my parents and their friends and my family, all the adults would sit around with a cooler full of beer and sit and hang out and socialize and drink, like unwind from the week. And to me, that's what connection would look like, right? Like a bunch of adults sitting around and chatting. But it's like, yes, they just so happen to have alcohol in their hands. But as a young child, that the fact that I can even like remember that and think about that, like that obviously plays into how we form these stories about how alcohol affects us and how it maybe so, quote unquote, enhances our lives. Yeah, it's, you can see how they're affected by it. Everybody's affected by it. And it's all coming through that kind of like subconscious kind of messaging that we're not even aware of. It is so frustrating too. I get so fired up when I see it now too. I'm like, that is not connection. Like, yeah, that is not true connection.
Yeah. And even if you think about, like, I was just thinking during the pandemic, right? It's like, it wasn't ever just like hop on a Zoom with your group of friends and have a catch up. It was always centered around, if there was any time you were connecting with anybody, yes, it was like wine and like whatever. It was always right on, mm-hmm, even if you, yeah. So it's wild to me. It's so wild. Like,
why can't we just all get together and like what's stopping us for saying like, hey, I would just love to get on Zoom and connect with you today, versus, hey, let's create this event centered around alcohol to get us to do the thing that we all desire. It's like, I think it also goes back to this kind of deeper conversation too, maybe for another day, but getting in touch with like, what do we desire? What are we longing for? And when we know what that is, then it's like I call it the desire underneath desire. We think the desire is to connect with people. And the way to do that is through, getting together for drinks or hopping on Zoom during the pandemic with, for happy hour or whatever. But if you get really curious, like what's the desire underneath the desire? It's, what is that? What does connection mean to you? And why can't we just say, hey, this is what I desire, to connect with you, but instead of kind of dressing it up as this, like having an excuse, like do we have to have an excuse to get together? Like so many things in my world when I was drinking, it was like, hey, yeah, let's meet outside and have a drink. Let's stop by for a glass of wine, or, why not just, hey, I haven't seen you in a while and I'd love to know what's been going on with you. Why don't you pop over? Why can't we just say that? Why does it have to be alcohol? And I think it's largely because of our conditioning, the messages that we've received that say like, this is the way to do it. And it's not as risky, right? Because it's not as risky.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. And I also feel like, I don't know exactly like how to, like, there's something really wild about the fact too, where we're telling ourselves this lie that we need alcohol to connect. But as you said, like when that cognitive dissonance starts coming in and you start to get that like feeling like, I'm not quite sure if this is like what I need or want. But then because of how we stigmatize, I don't know where I'm going with this, but just, okay. Because we stigmatize alcohol, I'm thinking of my own personal journey, right? Like when the voice started saying, this is an issue, maybe you need to like figure out if drinking is serving you. I don't feel like I could say that to anybody, not one human on this planet. Like I eventually said it to my husband, but I didn't feel like I could say that to anybody for a while. And so we're desperate to be, as you said, be known, but then we end up when we're on this journey hiding this part of ourselves. And it's what keeps us stuck for so much longer. And so we're longing for, am I making any sense? We're longing for connection, but we can't even really say what we're struggling with. And then it just ends up feeling so heavy and so hard, you know?
Yeah. Well, you're exactly right. It's like we're doing the thing that's what we think is going to help us get what we desire, the connection, and yet it is the very thing that is keeping us from getting the thing that we want.
Yeah.
It's like it's this like kind of sick little, circle of how it's like, yeah, this is what I want, this is what I desire, and yet this is the thing that I'm using for that. And yet it's also I can't tell you how many of my stories that kept me stuck in drinking, like how many of those were exactly that. It's like, I thought that wine was making me a better mom, and yet it actually was the thing that was getting in the way. And that's just such a common theme. It's those things that I'm so sure about that actually were not true at all, but we're so convicted by them. I think, first subconsciously they're driving us, but then once we're even bringing awareness to them, we're so convicted by them because the threat, we feel that threat that comes along with, well, what if I find out that this isn't true? Once I bring awareness to this, once I find out what's maybe really is the truth, like it's scary, because then that means that things are going to change, and changes. What does that look like? If I really admit that I think this is not helping my marriage and I want to do something about it, what if I say that out loud and now it's out there? How does that change things? And what if he's not on board with it? What if he totally disagrees? What if, that fear, I think, is such a big piece of it. It's like we're fighting what we desire, and fear is keeping us from being able to do anything about it.
Yeah. It's so true. Do you remember like how it felt to be vulnerable and open with somebody, and maybe it was your husband, maybe it was somebody else, like the first, like in your early non-drinking days, and what did it feel like, and was it scary, and how did it come out? And
it's like such a good question. One of the I do know that like one of the most courageous things I did when I was still stuck in my drinking world was I called a girlfriend, a really good girlfriend of mine, one day on a whim, and like I felt this urge to like say out loud that I'm drinking and I don't want to be drinking. I'm drinking more than I want to be drinking. I don't know what this means. I don't know what I'm going to do about it, but I just had this urge to like say it out loud. And I think it was one of those like moments of radical honesty with myself and by putting it out there. And so I called my girlfriend, Jen, and I was like, listen, hey, I don't need you to say anything. I don't need you to do anything. I just need to say this out loud. And she's like, okay. And I said, I said just that, like, I'm drinking more than I want to be drinking. And, so like, I've got to figure this out. I don't know what this means. And she was such an amazing friend. She was like, okay, well, I'm here, to listen and whatever. And nothing, like, I didn't need her to fix anything. I didn't need advice. I didn't need anything, but being able to, that was like my first really big, vulnerable kind of moment. And I chose her because I was certain that my relationship with her was not based on alcohol. Like she was my one person where like we had just as many non-drinking times as we had maybe drinking together. Wine was, I knew that it was not part of our relationship. So it was a really good way for me to try vulnerability, to take that risk. And then, that kind of opened the door to being able to explore it. But, moving on to kind of being alcohol free and then being vulnerable, I think it's something that just learning, who the people are, like knowing, for instance, that she was such a good friend that my relationship was not going to be threatened. That was a good, safe person to kind of pick to start that vulnerability and seeing what that looked like. And then also seeing how that gives permission for somebody else to also be vulnerable. That's the beautiful gift of when we are courageous enough to show up as ourselves and be vulnerable, that we're giving someone else permission to do the same thing. And knowing that all humans want connection, and that's what we're all like kind of looking for. And we have all of these things that keep us from being able to like get that. You're also not only freeing yourself, but you're gifting somebody else that opportunity to do the same.
Yeah. So good.
What did that look like in your experience?
How long had you, I just curious, how long had you been friends with her?
So gosh, that's a good question. Not forever. We met when our little ones were little, but yeah. So 5-6 years, not forever, but she just was, she was just my person.
Yeah. Yes. I had a similar conversation, but it was like, with my best friend, but she still lives out in LA, and we've been friends since we were 15 years old. And so she was like very much relationship not built on alcohol, because even though she was my first person we ever tried to drink together, I knew. And so I laid it all out there for her when I was over in the States for the one summer, and we were at, tacos, and I was just like, verbal, all the things, diarrhea. I told her everything, and how much I had been drinking and what it was doing to me and all the embarrassing stuff. And at the end of the conversation, she was like crying. I was crying. And she was like, I am so sorry that I didn't know this and I didn't do more. And I was like, Holly, oh my gosh, like you couldn't have done anything. Like you couldn't have done anything, because I wasn't ready to tell you anything about how bad it was until this moment now. And at that point I was several months alcohol free. I was like, I wasn't ready. And she, she said to me, I mean, I love her like a sister. She was like, I knew you were drinking too much, but I didn't know how bad, and I wouldn't have known what to say. And I was like, if you would have said something to me, you know what I mean? If you would have said, Christy, I think you might be drinking too much. I was like, I don't even know what that would have done to our relationship. Like, I'm hoping that like I would have, like, hopefully would have come back and apologized for my bad behavior that would have resulted from you telling me I was drinking too much. I wouldn't have heard it. I would not have heard it, and I wouldn't have reacted well. So it's like, there is nothing you could have done. But anyways, all this to say that open, vulnerable moment, was just, that was true connection. That was true connection and true friendship. And yeah, I think we're both really lucky to have people like that in our life, obviously,
That's that gift, that hidden gift of being vulnerable, is creating more connection. So we're so afraid of actually being vulnerable, but then when we are with the right people, I mean, I remember when I finally said, shortly thereafter, I told my husband, like, this is like, something's gotta give. And this scares me. Like, even just being able to say out loud, like, this scares me for how it'll affect our marriage, and for him to receive it so beautifully and so supportively. And so like, no, I am all, like, by the way, this is your journey. This is your journey. Like, this is not an us journey, but like, I am in full support of it. And it will be okay. And I think that, that would be a place if maybe our listeners, if they are not practiced in sharing vulnerably, and that's something that is appealing, like this, kind of diving into this idea of connection and what it really looks like, first getting really curious about what is connection? What would it feel like? How would you know if you're connected to somebody? The difference for me in the drunken nights with girlfriends over wine, that feeling is completely different than the heart to hearts that I've had with, girlfriends without wine or my husband. Like how would you know the difference in the two? And then also practice or consider, being vulnerable. Who would be the people, or find one person that you could pick to share something in a vulnerable way. And just try it. We're not saying like, go tell the whole world that, whatever, but finding one person that you can begin that maybe journey of sharing and opening vulnerably, I think is so powerful. And I think it can very easily start with like, hey, I want to do something about my drinking, but I don't know what that looks like yet.
Yeah. So good. And this is the other thing that's so cool. And like, I mean, when I did alcohol, I didn't know that there were such things as coaches. And so that's the other thing that's so cool, right, about what we do is that for so many of the women that I talk to, and I'm sure it's the same for you, they don't feel like they can say this stuff to anybody else. And so even a discovery call is so impactful, because for a lot of times it's just for the first time you can sit across from somebody that understands what you've been through and is going to listen and not judge you, meet you where you are with grace and compassion, all the things, and just you can say it out loud to somebody else, I wish I knew that like people like us existed when I was going through this, because I didn't have that conversation with Holly till later. I didn't have the conversation. I mean, I did quite early on have the conversation with Chris, my husband, but it was very vague because I was so scared, right? It wasn't this big open, like, here is what it all means. It was just like, I don't know. I think I was just like, I don't know, but I know I need to make a change, but I don't know what any of it means. And so, yeah, I mean, do you hear that? Or do you feel that, I guess, a lot too, of just like so much of what we do is just allowing other women to connect with us, right?
Yeah, that's what I think makes this job just so like the best job in the entire world is being able, and that's why I have my own coach too. It's being able to bring the stuff that, I want to process and, kind of bring to the light, which, by the way, like, I think we'll have to do this in another episode too, but talking about how the enemy uses fear and as a weapon to keep us stuck, right, and turned away from God. And so taking that and how shame is really at the core of all of that fear too, and how that slight turn to something different into being vulnerable is actually, I mean, I love how Kurt Thompson, you've heard me say this a bunch of times, Dr. Kurt Thompson, he says, like, we don't do vulnerable. We are, as humans, vulnerable. And, I think about how when we are sharing vulnerably, when we're turning to vulnerability, that's also a turn away from the enemy and a turn back to God. And how much power is in that, just one little step in the other direction, which will lead to greater connection with the Lord and through other people. I know there are a lot of things too, speaking of like, coaches, like a lot of times, maybe there are things that I have that I don't even bring to my coach, but Jesus is the best coach of all. And so even just in my quiet time, having that kind of like radical honesty with something that I am feeling that feels very vulnerable, but I'm not ready to maybe share with somebody else, or maybe never will be. I mean, that's a space for that as well.
Yeah. Oh, that is so good. It's so good. I feel like my prayer life has just gotten It's so radically different than well, first of all, let's be honest. When I was drinking, I wasn't getting up and, reading the Bible or doing a devotional, doing anything because I was too tired and too hungover. So now, obviously to hold space for God and to actually connect with him by actually laying out our fears, which is exactly what Satan doesn't want us to do. And actually talking to him like the real person that he is and saying, I am scared, or, saying this is really, I'm struggling with this. Like I'm just like spitballing here, but like, how was I praying before? Like, what was it? Cause it wasn't open. It wasn't vulnerable. It wasn't. Does that make sense?
Well, no, it does. I love that you're spitballing there, because it's exactly how much of our relationships with other humans, are parallel or reflect our relationship at the time with the Lord, and what those similarities are. To your point, for sure, I tried to keep. It was painful to be vulnerable with the Lord. And so my prayer life did not look, it was more of like, hey, this isn't working for me and you're supposed to be working for my good. So help a sister out and work for my good. Okay. Like, cause right now I'm feeling like there's nothing good. It was very me focused, even though, that's not exactly how I did it, but whereas now
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
It's like, hey, this is what's on my heart. Like, this is, in order to like bring what's vulnerable, you have to first know kind of what is on your heart. And I think we do such a good job of protecting ourselves from that vulnerability, from what's on our hearts, because of the fear that comes along with it, because of the lies that we started believing so long ago from the enemy that say, keep us that way, distant from the Lord. So so many, layers to this, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that, so much of obviously connecting with someone is also like listening. And so when you were saying about, like we were both talking about just listening and hearing from God, not just like giving our laundry list of requests of what's going on, like how can you connect if you're not how can you connect with God if you're not listening to him? And how can you connect with another human on this planet if you're not really listening? Because how can you really be listening after 2 glasses of wine? You can't. It's a different level. And so, as coaches, I think so much of what we're taught is just hold space. And how can you hold space for anybody, or, most of all God, when you're not switched on all the way, right?
Yeah. Oh, so true. Yep. That's exactly right. And I think that's the awareness that I now have for what that looked like for me is so huge in being able, like, as we say, like the awareness is 80% of the work, being able to, and so overcoming that fear of like, I'm going to bring attention to this. I'm going to draw attention to, I'm going to get curious about like the next time I'm out with my girlfriends drinking wine, I'm just going to, I don't have to change anything right now. You don't ever have to change anything related to your relationship to alcohol. But just maybe going in, if you want to start getting curious about it, start paying attention to like, okay, I'm going to start this night and this is what connection would look like. And what am I actually finding as I go throughout the night? Did this feel, and keep asking those questions. I think that leads a long way to being able to find the truth. And in the asking, you're also being vulnerable, like, because, even just asking a question, right? There's risk in that, because if I get an answer, that's the other part of it. Get an answer that I don't want. Oh gosh, no, this isn't helping me with connection. How do I do with that? Well, that's the good news. You're getting to the truth. And then that's where you have that opportunity to do something about it.
So good. It all starts with getting curious. So good.
Yeah.
Getting
Curious. Yeah. So fun. Well,
So
I,
good.
for one, love connecting with you every time we get to do this.
No, me too. It's so good. When you notice like just the relationships that you, like, I don't know, and this is obviously a big one for me, you know, you and I, but yeah, when you see the difference, right, in how you're connecting with other people versus before, like if anybody's listening, just like know that we're not making this up. It's so much different. It's so much like better and deeper on this side of it.
Yeah. Well, it's like I think about we moved years ago out from where we were. We were closer to the city, and then we moved further out. And I remember being so kind of resistant. Like I didn't want to move. I knew like I was okay with like, you know, I knew the reasons why we were moving. I knew it was what was best for us and all of that. But I kind of was like, but things are great here. Like, why are we really, you know, and it's a little bit different than the drinking relationship, but once we moved out here and got settled, it was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much better it could be. And I think there's so much of my world now being free from alcohol that I'm like, I had no idea how much better it could be, you know, finding freedom from alcohol versus, I mean, there were parts of it wasn't good the way it was, right? But, yeah, you know, even if it had just been okay, like, yeah, even if we take like what was B- before, like this is, I mean, A+++, and who knew? Who knew?
Who knew? Who knew?
Who knew? Yeah, I'm glad I do now.
Love it. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. You can find all of our episodes at butjesusdrankwine.com, and make sure you follow us over on the gram at butjesusdrankwine.
To learn more about what we do, you can visit our websites at meadhollandshirley.com and lovelifesober.com.
Take a screenshot of this podcast and share it with a friend or two.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you don't have to worry about missing a single episode. And if you love what we're doing, please leave us a review on Apple or Spotify.
This helps more women who are feeling stuck and alone in the overdrinking cycle to find hope and encouragement.
Thanks, ladies. We so appreciate you. We'll see you next week.
Bye.